Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Long-Term Care Restraint Indicator Informational Webinar. HQO is pleased to host this webinar on the Long-Term Care Restraints Indicator. In facilitating this session, HQO hopes our participants will gain a better understanding of the physical restraints definitions, coding practices, and how this indicator is calculated for the HQO's public reporting long-term care website. So first, some logistics for today's webinar. Today's session will be recorded. The slides from today's session, as well as the Q&As, will be translated into French and will be available on the HQO website in a few weeks following the broadcast today. Attendees are encouraged to submit questions through the questions box. Kindly click on the orange arrow to maximize the menu, and you will see the questions box where you can enter questions to the speakers and panelists. Given the number of participants and panelists in today's webinar, questions will only be answered at the end of the session. I am happy to announce that we do have over 400 registrants for today's session. For today's agenda, we have a welcome and introduction that will be given by myself, Michelle Ray, the Director of Performance Measurement and Reporting here at HQO. Then I'll go into a brief overview of long-term care public reporting. Then we'll get into the restraint definitions and a particular case study that will be presented by Mary Nestor, Jerry St. Louis, and John David Stanway from CAIHI and the Ministry. We'll then have some presentations from homes, so some home-to-home sharing experiences of using restraint rates and quality improvement initiatives by Nico and Kathleen and Doreen and Wei, all from different long-term care homes across the province of Ontario. We'll then close with a question and answer session and some information about our evaluation following the webinar. So as noted, we do have a series of presenters today, and I will be introducing them at the beginning, and then each presenter will introduce the following presenter. So I'll start with a little bit of an introduction, and then I'll be turning it over to Mary in a little bit. We do also have some panelists who will participate in today's webinar to be able to answer any questions that you may have. We have Gail Stubitz, the Program Lead for Residents First from Health Quality Ontario, as well as Sabrina from Specialty Care, and Carol Holmes, who is a registered nurse from the Registered Nurse Association of Ontario. So first I'll talk a little bit about Health Quality Ontario. So HQO is an arm's-length agency of the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. We work in partnership with Ontario's healthcare system to support a better experience of care, better outcomes for Ontarians, and better value for money. We are legislated under the mandate, the Excellent Care for All Act from 2010, and we have three main areas of our mandate: to monitor and report to the people of Ontario on the quality of the healthcare system, to support continuous quality improvement, and to promote healthcare that is supported by the best available scientific evidence. The Excellent Care for All Act of 2010 provides new standards to ensure that Ontarians receive health care of the highest possible quality and value, and aims to improve the quality of Ontario's healthcare system and make sure funding is used to provide the best possible care so that the patient is at the center of the healthcare system, giving us a patient-centered focus, and decisions about care are based upon the best available evidence and standards. We want the system to be focused on quality of care and the best use of resources. The main goal of the system is to get better and better at what it does. So first, our mandated areas. Evidence development and standards is a major branch of the Health Quality Ontario. It has become increasingly important that Ontario's health policy and decision-making environment be based around sound and irrefutable evidence. HQO works with clinical experts, scientific collaborators, panels, and field evaluation partners to provide evidence about both the effectiveness and cost-effectiveness of health technologies and services in Ontario. Requests for HQO's evidence-based reviews come from both the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care and the broader healthcare system. This provides an effective model so where we can have better treatments and explore ideas from other provinces and countries, but then provide them in an Ontario context for their applicability. Another area of our mandate is to support continuous quality improvement. HQO is committed to accelerating quality improvement across the healthcare system. HQO supports quality improvement across Ontario by facilitating change and assisting in the development of organizational quality improvement plans, which are required by the Ministry. HQO programs and quality improvement advisors provide focused, expert assistance as well as an evidence-informed integrated quality improvement curriculum that addresses the needs of provincial cross-sector teams, such as HealthLinks, which is supported by BestPath, as well as some of you may be familiar with Residents First, which was a quality improvement initiative supporting the long-term care sector. And lastly, the key area of our focus of our webinar today is our final mandated area, monitoring and reporting on the quality of the healthcare system. We know that Ontarians want a sustainable public healthcare system that helps people stay healthy and delivers excellent quality care when they need it. Monitoring and public reporting on quality helps define excellence and provides a clear standard with which to articulate what high-quality care is and what success looks like. HQO supports transparency and accountability through objective monitoring and reporting on health system performance. Now we'll go briefly into a little bit more detail about long-term care public reporting at HQO. In 2011, HQO consulted with an expert panel of scientists, clinicians, and frontline providers, and through a consensus-built, evidence-driven process, were able to identify indicators that describe the quality of care in the long-term care system. These indicators are highlighted throughout on slide 11, as being indicators across the 9 attributes of a high-performing healthcare system. These indicators were reported at both the provincial level and for some of them at the home level. The 4 indicators highlighted in green describing residents who have worsening bladder control, residents who have had a fall, residents who had a pressure ulcer that recently got worse, and residents who were physically restrained are the indicators that are reported at the home level. Today our focus will be on the percentage of residents who are physically restrained, our RIE indicator with data that comes from CAHI. On slide 12, we've given an overview of the long-term care performance measurement journey, starting with the implementation of the RIE MDS in July 2005 and following through with our HQO's directive to publicly report on quality from the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care in 2008. In 2010, we started voluntary reporting with 73 homes offering to volunteer their data on HQO's public reporting website. And up until October of 2012, all of that reporting was championed by over 299 homes voluntarily reporting their data. In October of 2012, the ministry required all homes to publicly report, so all 600-plus homes across the province of Ontario were publicly reporting their data on HQO's site. And in a couple of weeks, we will be introducing benchmarks alongside the home-level data on our site. Some of you may have attended the previous webinar that we had in April when we first launched benchmarks to the sector. Benchmarks was an evidence-driven process, and we're happy to be able to support the homes in their quality improvement initiatives. A little bit about the long-term care public reporting side on slide 13. So the long-term care public reporting side, as I noted, has provincial results, individual long-term care home results, and aspirational benchmarks. We hope to update the long-term care website in the next couple of weeks with 2012-13 fiscal year data. As well, aspirational benchmarks will be presented alongside homes and provincial data. In 2014, we look forward to working towards quarterly reporting and the development of new indicators that could be reported to identify the level of quality within the home care sector, the long-term care sector. On slide 14, there's a brief snapshot of what the long-term care public reporting website currently looks like. We have data that identifies at the provincial level both the current fiscal year and the fiscal year prior to that. We are also going to be included the benchmarks that have been identified and shared with you in April. We'll have these annual provincial results for all 12 of the indicators, including the 4 that have results at the home level. I'd just like to note that all of the data is now up there for all 635 approximately homes in the province of Ontario, and these homes are including both for-profit, not-for-profit, municipal, and charitable homes. The attributes that are covered across on our website include accessibility, effectiveness, safety, appropriately resourced, and population health. On the next slide is another screenshot of what the website may look like to include both the provincial average and the benchmark alongside home-level data. As indicated prior, the 4 indicators that are reported at the home level are falls, incontinence, pressure ulcers, and restraint. The focus of today's discussion will be on the restraint indicator. On slide 16, we have an overview of how data is captured and shared with CIHI, and then finally with HQO for public reporting. Initially, residents are assessed within the long-term care home, and this data is then submitted to CIHI to the CCRS system. CIHI receives the data and calculates the quality indicator results and posts these quarterly on the CIHI e-reporting tool. This is a tool that homes have access to both their information and other homes' information for all homes across the country who submit data to CIHI. We also at HQO receive this data from CIHI as well. This is the data that is then used for public reporting on our site. For all homes that are reporting for the first time, we do an information verification process that includes not just data, but also information about the name of the home, the bed size, the home administrator, and other important information that will be uploaded to our site. Every year and every quarter, we'll be able to contact homes and ensure that the information that is on our site is accurate and accurately represents the information for that particular home. We still do encourage homes to check their data frequently on CIHI's e-reporting tool. On slide 17, I'd just like to go briefly over the learning objectives for today's session. By the end of the session, we hope you will come away with a better understanding of the following 4 items. The daily physical restraint use indicator definition based on both the RIE MDS 2.0 and the legislative requirements on restraint use. Restraint coding practices, and how the indicator is calculated by CIHI for HQO's public reporting, and how your restraint indicator results can inform quality improvement initiatives in the future. Now I'd like to turn it over to Mary Nestor, who's Senior Manager, Compliance and Enforcement Performance Improvement and Compliance from the Ministry, and as well as Jerry St. Louis and John David Stanway, who will be presenting from CIHI about the restraint definitions, and then we'll get into a case study.
Great. Thank you very much, Michelle. So the role of the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care in our long-term care home inspection program related to all issues of legislative requirements, and in this particular case, restraints and PASDs, is to ensure compliance. Aside, of course, from conducting inspections to ensure compliance, knowledge and a comprehensive understanding of requirements by long-term care homes contribute in a major way to supporting and ensuring compliance. And all of these elements, in turn, support the quality of life and quality of care for residents living in long-term care homes. At the outset, I'd like to draw your attention to 4 important documents which set out or summarize legislative requirements related to the use of restraints and personal assistance service devices, otherwise known as PASDs. So the first document, of course, is your source document. That is your definitive source of definitions and requirements, in other words, the legislation, the Long-Term Care Homes Act and its Regulation 79. The second document is called the Guide to the Long-Term Care Homes Act and Regulation 79, Part 1, which is a document that was released in June of 2012, and it's a plain language description of what is in the legislation, and that document can be found on longtermcarehomes.net. The third document is the inspection protocol entitled Minimizing of Restraining. And I'll say a few more words about IPs in just a moment. The fourth document is a slide deck which over 3 years ago, when the Long-Term Care Homes Act had just been brought into force, the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, along with the Advocacy Center for the Elderly, jointly held a webinar to review and explain the legislative requirements related to restraints and PASDs. That slide deck continues to be available on longtermcarehomes.net, and on slide 20 at the bottom, we've indicated the path to follow to get to that slide deck, and as well I know that it will also be made available in conjunction with the slide deck that we are reviewing today, just as a reminder for those of you who may have attended the 2010 session, and obviously as additional and complementary information for those of you who did not. On slide 21, I have summarized here for you some, first of all, introductory principles in terms of the Long-Term Care Homes Act and its regulation, being the single legislative authority for safeguarding residents' rights and improving quality of care, as well as obviously accountability for long-term care homes. And this is a very, very important concept when looking through the lens of minimizing restraining. These two concepts of safeguarding residents' rights and improving the quality of care. And the requirements for long-term care homes, you'll see in the bottom half of this slide, are indicated, first of all, in the Long-Term Care Homes Act itself, sections 29 to 36, which again, for those of you who may not have referenced the legislative language, I strongly encourage you to do so, because that is your source document for understanding the requirements, definitions, and all of the contributing factors to being in compliance with legislative and regulatory requirements for restraints and PASDs. So there are two portions, obviously, first sections that are in the Long-Term Care Homes Act itself, section 29 to 36, as well as sections 109 to 113, which are to be found in the regulation. And these set out the requirements around minimizing of restraining, when and how physical devices to restrain a resident are to be used, and of course, when and how PASDs are to be used. On slide 22, two elements contribute to appropriate understanding of requirements and actions. First of all, it is not the device itself, in most cases, that defines whether or not something is a restraint. It is the effect that it has on the resident. So the first bullet on this slide summarizes that. A person is not considered to be restrained using a physical device if the resident is able to release it, himself or herself. The resident understands how to release the device and is physically able to do so. And the direct legislative reference to this concept is to be found in the Long-Term Care Homes Act, Section 30, Sub 2. And the resident must be able to easily remove the device, and the resident, if the resident struggles or takes an extended period of time to remove the device, then it is considered to be a restraint. And other contributing considerations are that contribute to being in compliance with legislative requirements are requirements to develop strategies and interventions to deal with responsive and other behaviors, as well as, of course, effective falls management program. And the second element to understanding in a comprehensive way is the role of comprehensive and collaborative multidisciplinary care planning, which involves the resident and the substitute decision maker and clearly defines objectives and benefits to the resident. On slide 23, some additional key considerations which enhance satisfaction, quality of life, safety and comfort and support for residents, and address their individual care needs, all of which align with and are in support of the philosophical framework and underpinning of the Long-Term Care Homes Act. And a few of these key considerations are indicated on this slide, on slide 23, the Residents' Bill of Rights, what the mission statement of the long-term care home is, all the areas that spell out requirements in relation to the development of plans of care, obviously key items here around integrated interdisciplinary approach to care planning, obviously care plans which are completed at admission, reassessment, and at regular intervals updated, and the care conference requirements with the resident and the substitute decision maker. And of course other general requirements for programs some of which are specific to the areas around restraints and PASDs, as well as general requirements for all programs. In other words, written descriptions of the programs that outline goals and objectives, etc., as well as the use of appropriate equipment based on the resident's condition, and the very critical need to evaluate and update at least annually both the written descriptions as well as obviously individual elements within. Some helpful tools, and I've actually specified two, one of which was referenced during my opening remarks, and that is inspection protocols. On slide 25, I have a summary of the, first of all, general comments around inspection protocols. They serve as inspection tools utilized during all inspection types that are specified on the slide in the first bullet here. They contain inspection instructions, guidance, probes, questions for inspectors to determine the status of a long-term care home's compliance with legislation. But it's the third bullet here. The responses to questions lead directly to a determination of compliance or non-compliance. And this is key in the use of inspection protocols by inspectors, of course, during inspections, but also in how long-term care homes can use the inspection protocols to help understand and test their own compliance in the area of minimizing of restraining. Because all of the questions in the IPs are directly linked to the provisions in either the Long-Term Care Homes Act itself or into the regulation, and of course a crosswalk between the quality of care and quality of life indicators, otherwise known as QCLIs, and the Act and regulation, which of course is a key element in the determination of compliance, non-compliance during an inspection. And there are 31 distinct documents. We encourage all long-term care homes to use the inspection protocols, and of course, relative to the topic of this webinar, the minimizing of restraining IP, which is one of the 31. So you can use the IP to enhance your understanding of the inspection process and methodology, and particularly, obviously, the legislative requirements, because the inspection protocol summarizes and crosswalks you right into the legislative and regulatory requirements. And as well, it's a very easy tool to contribute to and to incorporate into a home's quality management activities. You can carry out mock or practice inspections based on the content of the inspection protocol, and of course any of your other educational and inspection-related materials. They're all embedded on longtermcarehomes.net, and of course the IPs assist staff and residents to become both comfortable and familiar with the inspection process, and particularly topics being addressed by the inspectors. And on slide 27, just to put the minimizing of restraining IP in context, it is one of 31 inspection protocols that are available on longtermcarehomes.net, which our inspectors use in their inspections. The representation of the IPs on slide 27 is categorized by their category in the as used during the resident quality inspection during the RQI, but of course during any other type of inspection, whether it's a complaint, a critical incident, or a follow-up inspection, any one of these 31 IPs can and are used by inspectors because it's driven by the topic at hand. However, I bring to your attention on the far right-hand side under resident-related triggered IPs is the minimizing of restraining IP, which summarizes all of the legislative requirements. And to bring my portion of the presentation to a close on slide 28, at the start of my remarks, I mentioned the August 2010 slide deck and presentation. This chart on the slide 28 represents a reproduction of a chart that is found in that August 2010 presentation, and it offers a very helpful at-a-glance summary of all of the requirements in relation to physical restraining by physical devices, a PASD, as well as then the common law duty that is also referenced and provisions in the Long-Term Care Homes Act and regulation. And I hope that you will find this particular slide very helpful in terms of just navigating through the various requirements, and that will help you at a glance. So now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Jerry, from Kai-Hi. Jerry?
Thank you, Mary, and hello to everyone who is online with us today. I would like to review the inter-eye definition of a restraint with you this afternoon. This is the definition you should use for the intents and purposes of completing Section P4 of the RIE-MDS 2.0 assessment. The definition you are reading on the slide is actually taken from page 205 of the RIE-MDS 2.0 User's Manual. I would like to suggest that you refer to this definition and the guidelines in the manual until you are certain you are familiar with them and therefore coding Section P4 correctly. So the inter-eye definition of a restraint is any manual method or any device, material, or equipment that is attached or adjacent to the body, cannot be easily removed by the resident, and restricts the resident's freedom of movement or normal access to his or her body. So it's the frequency of use of restraining devices that is captured in Section P4. So in P4A, full bed rails on all open sides of the bed. P4B, other types of bed rails. P4C, trunk restraint. P4D, limb restraint. And P4E, chair prevents rising. On the next slide, I would like to point out that there are two exceptions to consider when determining whether a resident should be captured, whether a restraint should be captured in the RIE assessment. Firstly, if the resident is comatose or quadriplegic, P4C, P4D, and P4E can be coded 0, which indicates that a restraint has not been used, even if any one of those types of restraints were used. Secondly, if the resident is not able to get up and out of a normal upright chair because of a physical or cognitive disability, P4E, which is chair prevents rising, can be coded 0, which again is not used, even if he or she is placed in a chair that they are unable to get out of. So that is a recline chair or a chair that has a locked lap board. If you have determined that a restraint has been used, the respective items in Section P4 would be coded 1 if it was used daily, used less than daily, and 2 if the restraint was used daily. I have a couple of tips for you that I would like to pass along on the next slide. Please keep in mind that it is the effect the device has on the resident. It is not the name nor the purpose of the device. Therefore, some personal assisted safety devices may meet the definition of a restraint and would therefore be coded in Section P4. Do remember to consider the full 24-hour period during the last 7 days. Sometimes residents do not have restraints applied during the daytime hours. However, a restraint may be applied during the evening and night hours. Lastly, I would like to remind you that the two bed rail items, which are P4A and P4B, are not used in the calculation of the restraints quality indicator. P4C, D, and E are the only items used in calculating the restraints quality indicator. Now, we have prepared a small vignette that Michelle is going to review with you, and then we'll look at whether a restraint has been used in this story. Michelle?
Thanks, Jerry. So I'm going to read through a case study, and then we'll invite both Mary and Jay to comment on this particular scenario. So Mrs. Smith resides in a long-term care home. She requires the physical assistance of one staff member with some of her ADL functions and has mild cognitive impairment. She is able to locomote in the home by self-propelling her wheelchair. She will sometimes require the physical assistance of one staff to push her wheelchair if she becomes fatigued. Mrs. Smith has had a pressure-related wound on her coccyx in the past and as a preventative measure, she is tilted in her wheelchair 4 times each day for 1 hour each time. She is unable to reposition herself to an upright position once tilted. Mrs. Smith has no problem rising from a non-restricting upright chair. Now I invite Mary and both Jerry to comment on this particular case study. Mary?
Very good. Thank you, Michelle. So in looking at this case study, we actually see that there are 2 situations or 2 conditions that are happening here. One of them, of course, is Mrs. Smith in the chair that she can propel herself, and she's independent. But once the chair is tilted, she is unable to, she will potentially be unable to reposition herself into the upright position once it's tilted. And that is the key. And one of the, back to a very, very important concept that I had referenced in my earlier remarks as well, I'm going to emphasize it here, is that when we're considering something to be either a physical restraint or a personal assistive service device, it is the effect it has on the resident. And we can also have a PASD with restraining effect. In this particular case, once the chair is tilted and Mrs. Smith, when used for a period of obviously more than 4 times each day for 1 hour each time, it would be considered a restraint because Mrs. Smith is unable to reposition herself to an upright position once the chair is tilted, and she's not able to propel herself as she would like in the wheelchair. So the tilted wheelchair limits or inhibits Mrs. Smith's freedom of movement in a significant way. And in one of the other additional pieces of information, very critical, that we have learned about Mrs. Smith, and that's indicated in the case study, is that she has mild cognitive impairment. And because of that, she may not remember to ask for the wheelchair to be placed upright potentially. And that's where care planning, very, very clear assessment, a very individualized care plan is very, very important and key in this case, but also meets the definition of, or actually the legislative provision of Section 30 in the legislation, Section 30 sub 2, that the use of a physical device from which a resident is both physically and cognitively able to release himself is not considered restraining. And in this particular case, this would be a restraint because Mrs. Smith potentially could not cognitively as well, not only physically, but cognitively may have enough impairment to prevent her from even asking for the chair to be tilted, to be untilted. So some of the other additional key considerations here, a PASD that limits or inhibits freedom of movement must be removed, obviously as soon as it's no longer required to support ADLs, and in this particular case it is. However, it's still restraining effect on the resident. And also I would like to remind you that there is a very clear provision in the regulation, Section 112, around prohibited devices, but in this particular case this device is not on that list. However, it is considered, once the chair is tilted, a physical restraint, and all requirements around physical restraints would be applicable to this particular case. So Jerry, I'll turn it over to you for your additional remarks.
Thank you, Mary. With respect to Section P4 of the RIE assessment, the only restraint that is actually mentioned in this scenario would be captured in P4E, and that's chair prevents rising. The scenario indicated that Mrs. Smith was not comatose and she was not quadriplegic. It did say that she's able to rise from an ordinary chair. So the exceptions that I mentioned earlier do not apply to this case. She was placed in a recumbent position and could not get out of the chair independently. And this has happened on a daily basis. So P4E would be coded 2, which is used daily. So that's from the perspective of the RIE MDS 2.0 in Section P4. Now, I would like to pass the presentation over to John David, who is going to describe how the restraints quality indicator is calculated once you have completed the assessment.
Thank you, Jerry. So I'm going to be talking about a little bit about quality indicators in general, and then about the restraints one. And these quality indicators, we show them on our own website that you have to log into. And the one I'm talking about on the last slide, one about risk adjustment, I believe is publicly reported on the HQO website. Now, when we talk about what is a quality indicator, we have a suite of a bunch of them, but they're always expressed the same way. They're a percent of assessments that show a specific issue. So a quality indicator is obviously always on a scale of 0 to 100. And the way we calculate them is we do not count admission assessments or any other assessment that happens within 92 days of admission. And sometimes, depending on the indicator, we will exclude other assessments from the calculation too, if it doesn't make any sense to include them. So, for example, for the restraints indicator, the one we're talking about today, assessments that have been coded as comatose or quadriplegic are simply not included in the calculation. It's as if any of those residents are not in the facility at all for the purpose of calculating this. The other thing that sometimes we get asked about is that when we calculate these things, this is my third bullet here, we use assessments from 4 quarters. That is, we load in an entire year's worth of assessments every quarter to do the calculation. The reason we do this is that, not so much for this indicator, but for a lot of them, we use some data elements in the calculation which just don't occur very often, like, for example, weight loss or feeding tubes. So if you're at a very small facility, you just might not have enough assessments triggering the variables for us to do any calculation on it at all. So what that means is that when we say something like, this is your Q3 quality indicator, we mean it's a year's worth of data ending in Q3. Okay, so let's please go on to our next slide, number 36. So what I'm doing here and on the next slide is, to make things easy, I'm using a fictional facility where everything works out in nice round numbers. So what I'm talking about here is the raw quality indicator before any risk adjustment has been done. So this is the quality indicator that, or one of the ones you can see on our own e-reports, and it's the simple percent calculation. So what we're going to do here is we consider a fictional facility where we're going to calculate the restraints QI. And the first step of the process is to get a year's worth of assessments ending in the most recent quarter. So you got 4 quarters worth of data. And in this fictional facility, I've decided that over a course of that year, there were 350 assessments. So we start with our 350 assessments. Then we go through them, and we weed out all the ones that are admission assessments or within 92 days of admission. So let's say we found out that there were 100 of those. That's my arrow going from the 350 to the 250 box. We just threw out 100 assessments because they happened basically too early in the episode of care. So now we're left with 250 assessments, and then we do our next step, which is to apply, get rid of any other assessments that we're supposed to get rid of. And in this case, we're supposed to get rid of any of them that are coded as comatose or quadriplegic. So let's say we found 50 of those. We would throw them out, and then we'd be left with only 200 assessments left. And that's what we have to calculate our quality indicator on. So then we do the calculation. We know that what we have to look for are people who are, or residents that are coded as being daily on one of 3 types of restraints. So the trunk restraints, limb restraints, or chair prevents rising. And let's just say we found 50 people where that was the case. Then we have 50 divided by 200. That is 50 out of 200 assessments are showing daily restraint use. That works out to 25%. So what this is this 25% number. That is called your unadjusted quality indicator. Sometimes we call it the raw quality indicator. And on our e-reports, when you're looking at quality indicators and you drill down, the numbers you will see will be the 50, the 200, and the 25%. However, the main number you're shown, and the one that shows on the HQO website, is the one I'll talk about on the next slide, which we should go to now, and is number 37. And that is called the risk-adjusted quality indicator. So when we risk-adjust quality indicator, what we're doing is we're comparing your facility to one that's called the standard reference population. And the way Interreg got this population is it took 3,000 facilities in the United States and Canada, mostly the United States, and they were combined into one big population as if it was one gigantic facility. And when we risk adjust, we compare you to that. second bullet here. So when your quality indicator is risk adjusted, it's as if we're asking the question, sure, your quality indicator was 25% for the residents you have, but what would it have been if your residents had been more like the standard reference population? We're going to compare you to them. So on this last bullet, I'm pointing out that this can be a complicated process. It can be quite mathematically involved, but luckily for us, the restraints quality indicator we're talking about today is the one that is the least adjusted. It's the simplest calculation we do. And that's because your population is going to be matched to the reference population in one and only one way, and that is using the activities of daily living long form scale. So I made this blue table underneath where I'm showing you in your left-hand column, I'm saying your ADL score, which goes from 0 to 28, has been split up into 3 groups. We take all your assessments, which are in group, range from 0 to 9. They're one group. They're called the low risk group. And then we take the 10 to 23 range, and that's the second group. And then we take the 24 to 28 range, and that's the third group. We've divided everybody up. Pardon me here. And what we do is we match you to the reference population. So why did we choose these ranges, 0 to 9, 10 to 23, and 24 to 28? We did because in the reference population, things break down into nice, tidy numbers that way. You get 25% of people in the bottom group, 50% in the middle group, 25% in the top group. A quarter, half, a quarter, easy to do. If it happened to work out, so for example, on that previous page where I had a facility where I ended up with 200 assessments, if it had so worked out that a quarter of those assessments were 0 to 9 on the ADL long form, and 50% were 10 to 23, and 25% were 24 to 28, this risk adjustment would not change the quality indicator at all. The raw runs one will be 25%, the adjusted one will be 25%. But as soon as your facility starts to deviate from this 25, 50, 25 breakdown, risk adjustment is now changing your final number. So I've made up another fake facility here, and in this case I've said you have 50 assessments, but instead of being broken up like in the reference population, it's only 5 of them in the 0 to 9 stretch, which is much less than 25%. 25 of them are in the middle stretch, which exactly matches 50%, and a whopping 20 of them are in the top group there, which is much more than 25%. This no longer matches the reference population, so our final number is going to be changed from the raw number. And the way that works is that in that bottom group from 0 to 9, because those 5 assessments are much less than 25%, each one of those 5 people is going to be weighted more. And in that top group, because 20 is much more than 25%, each one of those residents is going to be weighted less. Because in the end, the 5 people are going to have to count for the same as the 20 people. And that is pretty much the whole way that this quality indicator is risk adjusted. And that's why sometimes your number, your risk adjusted quality indicator, can look quite a bit different than the simple calculation of what percent were restrained. And with that, that concludes my part of the presentation. So I'll turn it over to the Geraldton District Hospital, and they have a presentation.
Hi, thank you. At our hospital, we have 19 long-term care beds. And here we have 9 residents who require moderate help with care, 4 residents requiring maximum help with care, and 6 residents are dependent on staff for all physical activity and care. 3 of the 19 residents require this help due to physical decline. However, cognitively, they're doing well. 16 out of 19 residents do have a diagnosis of dementia.
Hi, this is Nico. In regards of challenges in reconciling the differences between the Long-Term Care Act and RIE and this restraint definitions, we have the next. So the use of positioning devices has been a challenge. For example, wheelchair seat belts to prevent one from slipping downward. Now, we kind of got the answer already in the previous slides, but still, I do believe it's still an issue ongoing, unless the resident can successfully undo this device. So further, I remember at one point we had to remove all the seat belts from the wheelchairs. On the other hand, I still do prescribe them as a positioning device for certain patients. Understanding the Long-Term Care Health Act, so minimal restraint definition, what we found was different understanding between the RI or CHI and the Long-Term Care Home Act, Health Act. Compliance officers' understanding, it happened some years, 2 years ago, I think. And what actually was the problem, because we did have a person so a resident that fallen previously, had severe injuries as fractures, and we did apply restraints due to, I'll say, non-compliance, which was due to cognitively, person is cognitively not able to call for help, or when the urge for toileting comes, the person would just act and go without calling for help. And that's when the falls were happening and the actual injuries were happening. So we had problems at that point.
Highlight quality improvement initiatives that continue to be in place at our organization to reduce restraint rates. We have ongoing education on fall prevention strategies and equipment to support and improve monitoring of residents who are at high risk of falling. Transparent, non-repetitive documentation. We've been very successful at streamlining what we do have. Transparent communication among staff, interdisciplinary team members, and family members. We bring stuff up at family meetings and each interdisciplinary team meeting. And we like to try to solve one problem at a time.
So the supports and resources that we offered and had, so geriatric behavior specialist from Thunder Bay was a person from Thunder Bay. She came, she held she was holding educational sessions to staff in regards of care, least restraint, dementia. Then during family meetings, we as well provided education to the family member, to the members of the resident, family members, I mean. As well, we had a series of videos that were shown as an education material to the families, staff, and as well residents if they were willing to participate.
So there has been many challenges that we faced in our home during the progress of the initiative, which were determining what was or what is not considered a restraint. Some of our residents prefer to have their bed against the wall, which is considered a restraint in our RI, as well as wheelchair equipment as positioning belts or just a safety belt. Some residents want to have all side rails up, which was a challenge that we faced. Residents having poor insight and understanding due to decreased cognitive level and their inability to safely ambulate and transfer. Determining how we would monitor the residents and which interventions we would implement. Deciding at which point the interventions used are ineffective and resort to using a restraint. Regarding RI, the definition of restraining a resident includes having the bed against the wall, regardless if this is the resident's wish. That still remains to be a challenge for us. Organizing the increased paperwork, education to staff for buy-in of strategies to be applied. And with our findings there, we've definitely had an increase in falls since the minimizing of restraints. However, there's a decrease in the severity of injury. We have the floor mats and the bed alarms, chair alarms, which helps to alert the staff more quickly. Family resistance due to restraint removal. We do still have the resistance for many of the residents that we have. A lot of the families still prefer them to have restraints on, but through the education, we're overcoming somewhat that part of it. and the staff buy-in due to the fear of increased injuries to residents. Still, we do still have some, I don't know, what would you call it, staff members wishing, yeah, the buy-in of staff. Some of them still feel that if they had restraints on, there'd be less falls, therefore less injuries, not acknowledging that there could be more severe injuries with that. And that's about all we have.
Hi, this is Doreen Grant from Bendale Acres. Good afternoon. Bendale Acres is a 302-bed home in Scarborough. We have 300 permanent beds and 2 beds for respite care. We have a 17-bed secure unit for management of exit-seeking behavior of Alzheimer's dementia. We also have a 15-bed secure unit for residents with aggressive responsive behaviors. We have a behavior support team, and the age range is from 27 to 100 plus, and a 37-bed French language service unit. Wei will address this part.
Okay, I think we're just trying to compare the differences between the definition in RIMDS and in compliances. And I think some definition already touched before. The only thing different is in MDS that we consider chair-prevent rising as a restraint. But from point of view of compliances, full bed rail use in the home is considered restraint. So, but when we code it, it's not considered part of the public reporting. And on slide 47, we talk about challenges in practice. Because the differences I mentioned earlier, and there's some coding errors identified in P section. And also staff are really confused about the definitions for the both part. One part is that we have to do the documentation and for the home, for then their use of bed rails. Another part is when we code in MDS that we have to identify the chair-prevent rising as a restraint. So things, the definition problem, so CAHI reported the daily restraint use increased.
Slide.
Okay.
Okay. Looking at quality improvement initiative, diagnose root cause for high rate of restraint. There is staff lack of knowledge on MDS coding in section P4, and families and residents lack of knowledge on restraint devices and use. Develop a plan focusing on the key issues, educate staff, identify behaviors that can be mitigated through other interventions, and falls prevention is also big. BSO team, Behavioral Support Ontario project team, works with residents who use tilted chairs to control behavior and to prevent falls. And we provide health teaching for family and residents and also visitors. Restraint rate, to reduce restraint rate. Measures RI assessment coding in section P4 and number of full bed rails used in Bendale Acres. We look at a safe environment with the least restraint, and the time frame was approximately 1 year. We will address the CAHI report on restraint use.
So we started from year 2010, and well, this report didn't show, but since that time we had extended staff teaching. And after that, our number of restraint, the rate of restraint have been gradually decreasing. So right now we're at 1.1%. It's about 2 to 3 residents in the home that being restrained by actually trunk restraint or chair-prevent rising. And it's a big improvement through these 2-3 years we've been working on it.
We engage family and residents in our initiative. There's education material available in the home and in the lobby on restraint relief. And annually, I have to present, or I do present to resident council and family council the use of restraints and the least restraint policy. And they're usually very well attended. Staff and management engagement in the initiative. The comprehensive assessment at admission for need for restraint is also helpful, and the risk-benefit assessment when restraint is considered. We've had a lot of resources externally. We have had physios doing feeding assessment, OT, and the use of PASD. 100% of our beds are now high-low, so we can look after the residents when the beds are at the lowest level, which is about 12 inches from the floor. And of course, we've used body pillows and gym mats by the bedside. Wait.
Okay, so there are some challenges definitely identified through the implementing of the QI initiatives. One of them is that use is pretty prevalent in the hospital. So when a resident needed to bend down, they really, a lot of family members and residents themselves are required to have the both sides rail up. And also the question from the family, and also the MDS coding error on restraint. So in service for nursing staff, and a lot of, we have to clarify a lot of concept issue. And also, we have to educate the staff on the compliance point of view on restraint definition through the Long-Term Care Act. So the next step in Bendale Acres, we plan to continue to maintain our low percentage of the restraint use. Also, we already doing the audit on quality indicators quarterly, and to pass this piece of information to the frontline staff. Ongoing teaching sessions on restraint definition and MDS coding to review the knowledge with existing coding staff, also the new hired staff. We continue to provide information to new admissions of family members related to bed rail use. And also we have the ongoing assessments on residents who need restraint to ensure safety and appropriateness. If when we realize that the bed rails are really needed, we have to have an interdisciplinary team to decide on the safety and appropriateness. So the final slide for us is our suggestion to you is the strategies we use here to improve the coding accuracy. If it's really you think it's apply, it can apply to your population. And also home-specific interventions to decrease number of falls and dementia-related behaviors through different kinds of alternatives, like the SO team and the fall prevention. The last one will be efficient alternative to physical restraint BA has applied, and we already had a successful rate reduction on restraint use. So thank you. That's all.
Thank you.
So thank you to the homes for presenting on their experiences of the RI-MDS restraints and the Long-Term Care Homes Act for compliance, their experience with that restraints indicator as well. So I think there's some key takeaways from our discussion today. First of all, the publicly reported daily physical restraints indicator is based on RI-MDS assessments. And this indicator includes daily use of limb restraints, trunk restraints, and chairs that prevent rising. The legislative requirements of physical restraints are similar but not identical to the definitions as per the RI-MDS. An accurate coding of the RI-MDS assessments and a good understanding of the physical restraints indicator can contribute to restraint use reduction through quality improvement initiatives. I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of our presenters today who took the time to contribute to this long-term care restraints webinar. We had a working group and many different presenters and panelists to provide different perspectives from both the ministry and CAHI perspective, as well as long-term care homes who gave their thoughts and opinions surrounding difficulties in being able to code restraints. We've also had some great panelists who've been able to provide us with a lot of good contextual information and clinical information surrounding the restraints definitions. Lastly, on slide 61, I'd just like to acknowledge our restraints webinar working group that have worked over the past few months to be able to pull together and facilitate this particular session. So thank you to all of those who are listed there. Now we'd like to go to some questions and answers. Throughout the registration process, homes were allowed to submit questions, and we've been able to also monitor the chats and as questions have come in throughout the webinar as well. And so I'd like to take an opportunity to go through some of the most frequently asked questions, but we do want to make note that there will be an opportunity to ask questions after the session has closed. And we will post the most frequently asked questions on our website as well when we post the slide deck. So in addition to the speakers that have presented today, we do have the following panelists who can also answer our questions. We have Sabrina Noseworthy from Specialty Care, Carol Holmes from RNAO, and Gail Stewart from HQO. Please note to attendees when you're asking your questions, do not include anything that has any patient or patient privacy concerns. So try not to have any self-identification of any of your patients. So I'll go to the first question, which was frequently asked, which is, will these slides and question and answers be available after this session? So the answer is yes. These slides will be consolidated and translated and uploaded onto the HQO site along with the recording. We'll also be adding in some of the other information that was referred to from both CIHI and the ministry today that we'll be able to point to and direct long-term care homes to for additional information. A second question that was asked is it possible to ever achieve 0% for the restraint indicator? Some long-term care homes, as seen from the MDS 2.0 RIE data, have achieved 0%. However, the benchmarking expert panel has articulated that having a 0% rate at all times may not be possible, as there can be instances where the use of restraints is appropriate. So at which point, 0% may be possible to achieve, but not necessarily the benchmark for quality of care. Question 3, is the ministry auditing the number of restraints? I'll turn this question over to Mary to answer.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. So the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care has access to the provincial RIE MDS submissions to CIHI through our health data branch as required. For example, if a licensee has ongoing non-compliance with the Long-Term Care Homes Act or regulation provisions related to restraints, we might look at the numbers of restraints in that particular long-term care home as one element of an overall picture of the operation of that particular home. We are currently evaluating what role all the publicly reported performance indicators might play within our own risk management framework. Since restraints are being tracked publicly by HQO, it would make sense for this to be part of what we consider. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. So our next question was about side rails. When are side rails considered restraint? I'll turn this over to CIHI first for an answer, but then it will be great to also have Mary's perspective from the ministry as well. So Jerry?
Thank you. So for the intents and purposes of completing the RIE MDS 2.0, bed rails are considered restraints if the resident is unable to remove the bed rails him or herself. Full bed rails are captured in section P4A, which is full bed rails on all open sides of bed, and other types of bed rails, which includes half and quarter rails, are captured in section P4B.
Mary?
Thanks. So from the ministry perspective and the legislative and regulatory requirements, bed rails are considered a restraint if the bed rails, whether they are full, three-quarter, half, or quarter, have a restraining effect on the resident and are not used to assist the resident with ADLs, for example, move in bed to prevent the resident from falling out of bed. Criteria under which the licensee is permitted to use bed rails with the intent of restraining the resident must follow the restraining provisions as they are outlined in the Long-Term Care Homes Act, Section 31, and in the regulation, Section 111. In addition, bed rails must follow Section 15 of the regulation related to assessment of the resident, the bed system, the steps taken to ensure the resident's safety and prevent entrapment. And additionally, I refer you to one of the important reference documents that I had referenced during my portion of the presentation, and that is the Long-Term Care Home Guide. And on section 2, page 100, there is more information or plain language information that will answer this question. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Mary. The next question is also related to side rails. If a resident has full bed rails raised to prevent them from falling out of bed because they have an air mattress on the bed, is it a PASD or a restraint? I'll turn this over to both Jerry and Mary again to answer. Jerry?
Thank you. So again, if you're completing a RI MDS 2.0, if bed rails are used, they should be captured in either P4A or P4B, which is full bed rails or partial. And always remember, it's not the intent nor the purpose of the raised side rails. It's actually the effect that they have on the resident that categorizes the side rails as a restraint from the inter-RI perspective and for completing the RI assessment. Mary?
Yes, thanks, Jerry. And I would, again, reiterate actually the same concept that Jerry has just mentioned. And in my response, it's the same approach, that it is not the device itself, it's the effect that it has on the resident. So the questions to ask and some key considerations in this particular scenario is, do the full bed rails prevent the resident from getting out of bed? What is the purpose of the air mattress? Example, is it to prevent skin breakdown? And does the resident stay in bed 24/7? So if the full bed rails both prevent the resident from getting out of bed, that is, they limit or inhibit the resident's freedom of movement, and prevent skin breakdown or promote healing, that is, to assist the resident with ADL, so movement circulation, then the full bed rails would be considered a personal assistive service device, PASD, with a restraining effect. As such, both the PASD provisions under Section 22 of the Long-Term Care Homes Act and the bed rail provisions under Section 15 of the regulation would, at a minimum, need to be in compliance. And once again, I also refer you to the guide to the Long-Term Care Homes Act, page 2-100. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. And another question about bed rails, I think this was the last one that we'll get into. Are short bed rails considered a restraint? Example, quarter or half size. Jerry and Mary?
Okay, so for Section P4, quarter and half rails are considered restraints, and they're captured in P4B. If a side rail is used on one side of the bed only, it's also captured in P4B. Now, if a side rail is used on one side of the bed and the other side of the bed is pushed up against the wall, that would be considered full bed rails, and that would be captured in P4A.
And from the ministry point of view, in principle, my answer to this question would be the same as the previously answered question was as to whether or not side rails are considered restraints at all. So short bed rails are considered a restraint if the bed rails have a restraining effect on the resident. So once again, that very important concept of the effect of the device on the resident. And they are not used to assist the resident with activities of daily living, so for example, to move in bed. Criteria under which the licensee is permitted to use bed rails with the intent of restraining the resident must follow the restraining provisions as outlined, first of all, in the Long-Term Care Homes Act, Section 31, and in the regulation, Section 111. And in addition, bed rails must follow Section 15 of the regulation related to assessment of the resident, the bed system, the steps taken to ensure the resident's safety, and to prevent entrapment, and other criteria that are identified in that provision of the regulation. And some additional considerations, short bed rails would not be considered restraints if the bed rails were used to assist the resident to move when in bed and the bed rails do not have a restraining effect on the resident, for example, to prevent the resident from getting out of bed. And again, I would refer you to not only the source document, meaning the Long-Term Care Homes Act and regulation, but as well the Long-Term Care Home Act guide. Thank you, Michelle.
Next question, Section 30, Section 5 of the Act talks about not restraining with blocks, barriers, devices, etc. What about Wonder bracelets and secure units? How are these coded? I'll turn this over to Jerry from Kai-Hi.
Wonder bracelets and secure units are not considered restraints. What you should do is always keep in mind the inter-eye definition of a restraint when you're completing the assessment. And if you go back to your manual and review that definition, you'll see that neither a secure unit nor a Wonder bracelet would meet that definition. So I can't emphasize enough that you really should use your RIE manual as your first and foremost resource to make sure that you're clear on what the definition is.
Thank you, Jerry. We're running out of time, so I think we'll just do one more question and then we'll wrap up. So how does coding restraints differ from PASDs? Jerry from Kai-Hi?
Well, some PASDs will meet the inter-eye definition of a restraint. It's very difficult to determine which PASDs meet that criteria without actually seeing the device. So again, keep in mind when you're completing the assessment, is it a device that is attached or adjacent to the resident's body that the resident can't remove easily, and does it restrict the resident's freedom of movement or normal access to his or her body? So if you apply that definition with the PASD in hand, you should be able to determine whether this PASD specifically would be considered a restraint or not.
All right, thank you, Jerry. So I just wanted to note that if you do have specific questions that were not addressed during the webinar session or any other questions, feel free to, we encourage you to contact the respective organizations listed on the slide deck or to send in an email to our long-term care team in Health Quality Ontario at the longtermcare.publicreporting@hqontario.ca. We can email out the English slides to the registrants early next week, but as noted earlier, we'll be translating and uploading this information to our website in the next few weeks. We'll be able to also include information as referred to from the Ministry and from Kai-Hi for further information and details surrounding the restraints definition. And lastly, I'd like to thank you all for joining us in our discussion today on the long-term care restraints indicator and looking at it from both perspectives, from the compliance and regulation perspective as well as from the Kai-Hi, RIE, MDS perspective. We do welcome your feedback on today's webinar, and there will be a link that will be circulated to all of you who registered. So please give us some feedback as to whether this was helpful and if there's any opportunities to improve upon this webinar and the speakers, as well as topics that we could perhaps cover in future webinars.